The High Middle Ages in Western Europe were peculiar in that it was then that war for the first time was decided to be contained and controlled, even though that society was fundamentally built on war. War was the entire lifestyle of the nobility. In fact, all they knew was war. They were almost always illiterate, which is why any of their charters were still almost always produced in Latin by clerics in their chanceries. Without war, they would not have any expansion of property or privileges. Without yielding enough loot, they would not be meeting their men's expectations of riches, which could lead to mutiny or abandonment. By the High Middle Ages, external warfare was not so much a threat to any kingdom, save for the pillaging of the second invasions of the Vikings, Hungarians, and Saracens, but even this was marginal in comparison with the damage the local lords were doing to each other, as well as their castellans. The internal weakness of the Catholic kingdoms because of this infighting is one of the things that led the foreign invaders to take advantage of them to the extent that they did in the first place. War was really the driving force of medieval society as a whole. Now, what if war was made holy? Imagine for a second the time when God told Abraham to kill his son Isaac if he was truly faithful to God. God already knew from eternity that he would not let him kill his son, but Abraham did not know this. So to him, he was specifically told by God to kill his son. If he did it, would his action, being a command by God, not be justified? This is what St. Augustine writes about in chapter 21 of his City of God, where he outlines the justifications for a Catholic to go to war all the way back in AD 426. What did St. Augustine believe to be a justification for war? To enter war, namely, if there was a just cause, if the intention of the Catholic was righteous, and if it was declared by an actual governmental authority. And during combat, war was said to be permissible if it was the last resort, if the action to be taken was proportional to the threat, if it distinguished between combatants and uninvolved civilians, and if it was overall conducted honorably and honestly. Now, was St. Augustine's doctrine of just war listened to? Of course not, but it's not likely really any kings, counts, or lords had read it, at least until Charlemagne's time, and even then, only by very few. The Germanic counts on both sides of the Rhine would not exactly have been very willing to give up their lives of plunder, their adherence to the Catholic faith being, as far as you know, quite nominal and still plagued with ancient superstition and only serving their Germanic warrior ethos. Nonetheless, Charlemagne's reign was an unprecedented shimmer of order and peace within the realm. Wars were fought against Muslims and pagans, and a temporarily renewed public authority gave fuel to the idea of a Catholic empire. The Church and its mission for peace had at first only marginal influence in its effort to snuff out the fiery attitude of the society it found itself in. Bishops themselves possessed armed retinues out of necessity to protect themselves as well as to participate in the raids indirectly or directly. However, their going on the offensive was often scorned by the Church in Rome, and they were forbidden to draw blood if they did enter combat. An established peace system in medieval Europe would have to come not from the nobility but from the clergy. Enter the peace and truce of God. The peace of God came first as a movement by the Church at Aquitaine to forbid attacks on church property and on unarmed monks and priests. The monks, started at the Council of Charroux in 989, began to pick up momentum at subsequent councils where throngs of peasants would gather and shout in favor of peace, bringing with them holy relics to have the saints themselves witness and watch over the proceedings. Another movement, the Truce of God, came a few decades later in Normandy. The idea here was to limit the days on which fighting could occur. At first, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday were out in recognition of Christ's Passion and Resurrection. This was extended to other days of the week and to feast days of many saints shortly after, leaving only a fraction of the year canonically open to warfare. The most important thing to take away from all of this is the fact that the Church had seized the responsibility of guarding public peace from the royalty. Public peace had been gaining in acknowledgement around the year 1100. The idea of an actual public authority in France came later in the High Middle Ages, with the notion of the crown coming at the time of Louis VI the Fat and being solidified under Louis VII and Philippe Auguste. Louis VI had been the one to resume the role of guarantor of public safety in the final years of his apathetic and lackluster father, Philip I, who had been excommunicated for his adulterous and incestuous liaison and excluded from the First Crusade. However, Louis was too late to the game. In the absence of a strong central early Carolingian authority, the Church had been the one to fill in the vacuum that was left open. Its influence was more strongly felt in the south, where royal influence was almost non-existent. The nepotistic bond between nobility and episcopacy had been undone, especially with the advent of the reforming papacy. This was all only the case in the Kingdom of France, however. In the Kingdom of Germany, the episcopacy was still very much intertwined with the nobility. As for the Truce of God, the Landfrieden, initially propagated by Henry III, then hijacked by individual dukes during the following regency and most of Henry IV's reign, was reclaimed by the imperial authority by the time of the First Crusade. So in Germany, the emperor was once again the keeper of public peace by 1100. The Church did play its part everywhere, especially with the far-reaching papacies of Leo IX and Gregory VII. So now that we've covered the importance of warfare in Germanic society, the doctrine of just war by St. Augustine, and the transformation of the papacy into a veritable universal monarchy in its quest to reform not only itself but the bishops, clergy, and nobles all over Europe, it is now time to talk about the history of dying in combat in the service of God. And to do that, we must go back to the year 847 when Saracens were threatening the city of Rome. In this event, Pope Leo IV was the first pope to offer a heavenly reward to those who died for, quote, the truth of the faith, the welfare of their homeland, and the defense of Christians. In a similar manner, the East Frankish counts, bishops, and warriors who died at the Battle of the Lüneburg Heath in the year 880 against the Vikings were canonized as saints, known today as the Ebsdorf martyrs. An important thing that is easy to overlook is the concept of murder in Catholic theology. To put it short, killing was killing. It was always a sin, no matter the intent. The different ways of dealing with this indicated the severity of guilt, which could range from a prescription of various periods of fasting up to 40 days with true contrition. What mattered was why the killer decided to kill another person, and how many people were killed, and by what means, among others. Even when fighting under the papal banner, which gave its holder specific papal approval for a military action, like in the case of the Norman conquest, there were still interrogations done among the soldiers about what they had committed against their opponents, with penances given to them. According to a contemporary document by Guillaume de Poitiers, a chapel was built near the site of the carnage of Hastings in reparation for the killing done, and to pray for the souls of those who had been slain. Other ecclesiastics of the time, like Burchard of Worms and Fulbert of Chartres, voiced their own opinions and assigned penances to killings of various kinds. In this way, St. Augustine's ideas on what constituted just war may have helped nuance the strict forbiddance on any killing whatsoever prescribed by Scripture. Lastly, it is significant to note that the Crusades did not seem to change anything in regards to the holiness of war. There were, as we have gone over, already religious elements of warfare, whether it was the conquest of the Merovingians and Carolingians, the defense against the Vikings and Saracens, or those like Louis VI who fought brigands and protected the poor in the religious sense as their God-given duty. There would have been secular reasons to make war in these times, and the religiosity of each campaign or battle could be nuanced by case, but to say that religious warfare did not exist prior to the Crusades, or even afterwards in a Catholic context, would not be true. In truth, all cultures on earth did this at the time, and the advent of secularism only seems different because it puts on the guise of ideology of whatever kind. The difference we see at the time of the Crusades is that the Church has taken more of an institutional role rather than one that attempted to guide the faithful strictly through its bishops. It can be hard to underestimate the extent to which the papacy had become a monarchy that could rival the secular ones by that time, through its domain of bishoprics, abbeys, and churches as the proprietary church system began to be eliminated as simony. So while there were structural societal changes, these did not create an entirely new paradigm of holy war that did not yet exist before Clermont. When the Eastern Emperor called on the Pope, who called on the Catholic nobility to come to his aid, they were drawing on something that already existed and knew could work, not something that had never been tried before, or even thought of before. Despite this, killing in warfare, even with papal or episcopal approval, was still condemned and subject to penalties and penance, no matter if it was against an internal or external foe. This is the end. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.